And now as we transition from the parent and provider perspective, we're going to go to the business perspective. So I'm honored to be here today with Mark Heath with the Economic Development Corporation. And we're going to introduce our moderator for this panel. But before we did, we want to talk a little bit about how this work has evolved over the years. So when I began this work over 20 years ago, it really was focused on why those first 5 years were important. That foundation, all the things we've heard about this morning. The early learning, it's, what you do in those early years makes a difference in that child's life long term. But over the years, that has begun to change a little bit.
Cheryl and I knew each other back then, but our worlds, those of early education, economic development, seem to be separate. However, in the last 5 to 6 years, this community has experienced strong growth in new businesses and job creation, and a totally different conversation is taking shape. Conversations about the lack of available child care to support the workforce are being heard both from employers and from employees. Since then, it's become clear that child care and business development are two lanes of the same road. They must work together if we're going to build a new and growing community in a way that is sustainable.
So with that, it's fitting that today's moderator is someone who truly understands the connection between education, workforce development, and community growth. Dr. Greg Hodges, president of Patrick and Henry Community College, has spent his career fostering success in both education and the local economy. He brings a wealth of experience, having served in various leadership roles at P&H. And with him, what makes him also particularly suited to be moderator for today's panel is his background in early childhood education. He actually began his career as a professor in that field and later taught in our elementary schools, making him deeply familiar with how early learning shapes future opportunities.
Today's panel will showcase diverse perspectives on the important role that child care and early education play in driving economic growth. Dr. Hodges' unique blend of experience, both in education and leadership, will guide us as we explore how these two sectors must continue to work together to foster sustainable economic and community development. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Greg Hodges to the stage to moderate this important session.
Already here. All right. Good morning. Thank you all so much. We're gonna try to save a little bit of time and expedite the process here. Rather than me introducing each of our panelists, as I get to them for a question, I'm going to let them introduce themselves so that we can save just a little bit of time. Our first panelist today is joining us. Hayden Placino Hensley is a small business owner with a very unique story, and you'll see in just a moment why he was invited to join the panel. But Hayden, would you introduce yourself, your business, and then we're going to dive into your first question, sir.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me today. I'm Hayden, and I am the co-owner with my wife, Rose, of Red Rooster Coffee in Floyd, Virginia. We also own Yellow Hen Childcare, which is in the same building and provides childcare to our employees.
You heard that. Red Rooster, Yellow Hen. You got it?
So, I can tell you a little bit about how it started.
Sure. If you're ready, let me ask you the first question. So tell us a little bit more about why you chose to offer on-site childcare at Red Rooster Coffee and how that's impacted your ability to retain employees and particularly working mothers that may work for you.
Well, we had a problem. I mean, it was pretty simple. My wife and I had a small child, and my wife wanted to go back to work full-time. I mean, it was cut and dry at the moment. But also, we were kind of running a black market child care facility out of my sister-in-law's house. And a woman who, she worked for us, and she had children. She was watching her children. She was watching my child. Then another woman who worked for us got pregnant, and she was watching her child. And then another woman got pregnant. And all of a sudden, we were like, we are overrunning this house. We're paying cash out of pocket to this person who otherwise would like to work somewhere else. And maybe we should come up with a more creative and formal solution to this problem. And so it really came out of the fact that several parents, single parents, and mothers wanted to continue their careers with Red Rooster. They were people who had worked with us for many years, several of them since the formation of the company back in 2010. And my wife is the co-owner, she's the CFO. I really needed her to come back to work, and she wanted to come back to work. And at the same time, we purchased what seemed like a really big building to us back in 2017. It was 11,000 square feet, and we thought we had a lot of room in there. And this was almost precisely the same time that we had spilled over in my sister-in-law's house. And we came about the idea to start a child care facility specifically for our employees' children. At exactly the same time that a local Montessori school had closed. And we were encouraged to speak to a young woman who was a teacher there who had been instrumental in getting their licensing for their early childhood education program. And she came in, we pitched the idea to her, and she immediately said yes. And within 3 months, we had a licensed child care facility in the building, and our children were all going there, and all of the mothers and parents were at work, most of them full-time. So that's how it came about. And what it's done for us has been to both retain workers. Almost 70% of the people who work for Red Rooster have had a child in Yellow Hen Child Care at one time or another, so that's quite a big number. The child care facility holds 16 full-time people, but with people having varying schedules, we can oftentimes in the summer hold about 24 people, 24 kids with the ratios. And also, we're able to bring in talent. We're able to bring in people, and not just mothers, by the way. I think it is critical to the workforce that mothers who want to work can work and have the opportunity to work. But we have lots of fathers whose wives have full-time jobs who come to Red Rooster and want to work at Red Rooster because of the child care facility.
Excellent. Let me ask you one follow-up question, Haiti. Given the challenges of a rural area like Floyd, how could you speak to small business owners, perhaps in our rural community, who are considering adopting a similar strategy or a similar initiative? What advice would you give them if they're considering doing an in-shop or in-house child care center for their local business?
Well, I always advise people to be more pragmatic and thoughtful about it than I was, because I sort of always am a little myopic and just want to solve my own problems and jump in the deep end of the pool. But in retrospect, it was far too early in our company to do that. We've always done that. Offered full healthcare premiums and matching IRA funds before we had the money to do it, because we felt like it was what we wanted to do. And the child care facility was no different. So the way it works is that our employees, when it started, paid $1 an hour for care. And the coffee roasting business subsidized the difference. So today, that difference is about $8,000 a month. So our employees pay $2 an hour for care, and Red Rooster pays the difference to Yellow Hen Child Care for whatever the difference is in enrollment tuition versus operating costs. So that's about $100,000 a year that we pay to operate Yellow Hen Child Care. Now, when we started this back in 2017, 2018, that was very substantial part of our gross income. You know, that was a lot of our revenue that ended up getting turned into childcare, to the point where, you know, within a year of operating, you know, and we felt it. Like, we thought we were going broke, and we were having operational struggles. So it was a little bit early for us to do that. But today, I would say, as a percentage of our revenues, it's quite a bit more manageable. And so I think it's important for employers to think, you know, what do I spend $100,000 on? And where are my priorities? And would that be a reasonable amount of money to think about retaining workforce, improving company culture, because I can't speak enough about what it's done for our culture, to have our children grow up together, to have social events and engagements where we're bonded together by that experience. It's completely changed the dynamic of our company. And I think you might find that there are things, if you are a $5 to $20 million company, let's say, there are things that you spend $100,000 to $200,000 a year on that maybe don't fit your mission and your culture and your goals as well as something like this might.
Excellent, thank you. Why don't you pass to Marianne? Marianne, we'll begin by asking you to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about the incredibly innovative organization down there in Southwest Virginia that you all stood up, the new nonprofit.
Sure. My name is Marianne Holbrook, and I work for EO. EO is a spin-off organization from United Way of Southwest Virginia that we just launched formally in January and publicly in July. So EO is Latin for go, and it represents that action-oriented, responsive piece of our work. And one of the largest pieces of our community portfolio is early care and early childhood education. So I'm super excited to see you all today, super excited to see the momentum that you have in this community, and share a little bit about what we've done.
Excellent, thank you. EO has been at the forefront of developing what we often refer to as cradle to career initiatives, including early childhood ed. How do you see these programs contributing to a stronger, more resilient and robust workforce there for Southwest Virginia?
Sure. Well, let's go back to what Jenna was talking about this morning, that we know that students who enter kindergarten ready to learn how to read are able to go into third grade. They're more likely to be reading proficiently when they leave third grade, and that's when they start not just learning to read after third grade, they have to read to learn. So one of those reasons is all of that data behind that. But what really has happened, at least in our communities in Southwest Virginia, is that the pandemic has laid bare childcare as an economic infrastructure piece that's vitally important. So I wanted to share a little bit about a pilot program that we stood up as a response to the pandemic in coordination with our businesses. So Go Virginia is Virginia's Growth and Opportunity Fund for the Commonwealth. This guy next to me can tell you all about that initiative. But during that, we started hearing from our employers that we were having very different conversations with all of a sudden, because they didn't necessarily, it's not that they didn't care about early childhood and brain development and their long-term effects on the workforce, but all of a sudden their people couldn't come to work and they cared about it in a really different business aspect. So we worked with Go Virginia that had some specific funding for business response for pandemic impacts on businesses. So we partnered with 4 manufacturers who were willing to create what is now known in the Commonwealth as that TRICARE program that Jenna Conway mentioned this morning. So we partnered with 4 different manufacturers that were willing to put in a piece of their employees' weekly tuition. We secured about $600,000 in private funding from private foundations that matched what the employer was putting in. And then the employee had a very small share. And when I say small share, wasn't as small as $1 or $2 a week, but it was about $10 to $20 a week. And so we were able to track that program. We worked with the employers to track talent retention, talent attraction, attendance for their team members, all of that. And so we knew that it could work long term. But what it did for our work is really put us on a trajectory that we're on now to increase access by creating additional slots for our Southwest Virginia region. In Southwest Virginia, our supply and demand between the number of students we have that want to be in early care and early childhood education is 3 times worse than anywhere else in the Commonwealth. So we just launched a partnership and have opened a regional child development center along with a lot of workforce development initiatives that are focused on early care and education.
Excellent, thank you, Mary. Let me follow up with a bit more expansive question. One of the things I think is so innovative about EO is the cross-functionality and the cross-sector partnerships, public, private, and philanthropic partners. So can you talk to us about how that cross-functionality is so critical? In other words, if we're going to solve a problem like childcare, it won't be one entity that does this. It's got to be cross-collaborative. How have you all addressed that and in driving sustainable change in the childcare system, that cross-collaboration, if you will? And then how does that influence business and economic growth regionally there in Southwest Virginia?
Yeah, well, the impacts are now obvious. Any company that needs to expand, any company that's considering locating to our region, they want to not just see the schools, they want to see what kind of economic infrastructure you have for those families. So we already know that that is taking off as a region, and that understanding and buy-in that childcare is not a family issue, it's an economic issue. So it's vitally important. When we started working with those partners, it became so obvious that the opportunity was there for the buy-in. And I talk about the buy-in. It's not just about money. It's about everybody coming together around that cause. And so what we've learned is that the most important piece of collaboration is building trust. We believe that you build trust by doing what you say you're going to do. So when we have gone to our private business community and said, hey, we want to come alongside of you and help you solve this issue for your team members so that they can come to work, particularly those female workers, they said, okay, what you got? We told them the concept. They came alongside of us, but that trust of doing what we said that we're going to do is so vital. So as you're coming together as a region, you all have a lot of momentum here in this community, but I also encourage you to continue to reach out across the broader region because that scale for rural communities is so important. When we think about securing grant funding, which, by the way, I don't know where the gentleman from the SBA at Longwood is, but there is a specific grant program that the Federal Small Business Administration offers through their Women's Resource Centers for businesses that's specifically for entrepreneurs who want to start child care centers in your community. There are resources out there, so make sure that you're connecting with those, bringing those to bear with your community members that are interested in being part of the solution.
Excellent, thank you. Would you pass the microphone, please? I'm sure needs no introduction to most of us, but Mr. Davenport, introduce yourself and frame that, if you would, from both local, regional, and from the Commonwealth of Virginia, because all of the questions I'm going to ask you relate to all 3 of those areas, so please.
Ben Davenport, and I've been around for a while, so and have covered been involved in a lot of different organizations. This, as Marianne alluded to, Go Virginia is one of the more recent ones that has had a profound impact on investing in a lot of different things that deal with workforce, and that's the primary thing, trying to improve the economy. But I've been involved with Virginia Tech, being on the board there. More recently, I've been really enjoying being the chairman of the Virginia Foundation for Community College Education, and have greatly enjoyed that. I'm on the Institute board, and as Greg and I get to work together on that, and I've been really really interested. I mean, you know, our businesses are here in Henry County and in the region, and First Piedmont, of course, is a waste management company, and Depot Energy also. So I feel very tied with the community. Very much want to see the community be prosperous and successful, and so that's.
Thank you, sir. So you've heard a perspective from a small business owner who brought child care on site. You've heard a perspective of a regional nonprofit who's bringing cross collaboration together to address the need. We're going to kind of transition now and talk about a large-scale employer on one hand, and then also both regional and statewide economic development incentives that may exist. So first question, Mr. Davenport, obviously, as we've said, you've been instrumental in shaping statewide, local, and regional economic development through your work. How do you see the relationship between developing child care and then driving long-term economic growth regionally, but also for the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Well, I want to give a little background. When what happened to this region, when we just basically had an outward migration of jobs, and we were left with a population, you know, our best and probably a lot of our highly educated people left, and so we were left with a population that was probably one that needed much more attention to being educated and had more problems of just inherent in the fact that poverty is the lack of education in the family, and that became so apparent to me in early 2000 when I went to a seminar in Richmond that Governor Hunt from North Carolina talked about the investment in early childhood education, and he said the Federal Reserve of St. Louis has just published a report that talks about the best investment that can be made today is in early childhood. At that time they had monetized it to be like a $7 return for every dollar invested in early childhood. Well, and then he went on to talk about the brain development. Well, I mean, this was like, I can't believe this. That all that's going on in a mother's womb and from the time of birth through the first few years of life, you think, well, you know, the child's not taking I mean, this is not a big deal, but it is a big deal, and what they're exposed to is so important. So, and the fact that you can have a profound impact on the long-term success of a child by actively being able to give good input of knowledge to that child, good interaction with that child from the time that they're born, especially through the first 3 years of life, when during that time they say about 80% of the mind gets connected, the wiring of the mind, and it's going to make the big difference in their ability to deal with math and with science and a lot of the different ability to communicate. So from that, I've got very interested in this. I served on the original Virginia Foundation for Early Childhood Development. Kathy Glazer, who still heads that up, and we developed that. And I can remember the General Assembly at that time, kind of like, you know, we're not going to get involved in babysitting.
That's right.
And we don't want to interfere with. I mean, they were looking for a reason not to fund anything. Well, you see what happened last year, and what I would argue is that we're seeing a paradigm shift in the way that early childhood development is seen. It's an investment in the workforce for the future, and if you don't make that investment, I mean, we have a chance as Virginians to, and I say right here in Henry County, we have an opportunity, which when Mark Heath wants to get an employer to come here, one of the first things that is going to be done by that future employer is he's going to be looking at the potential labor force, not today, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and what kind of system of education and interaction is there in getting that child prepared to be a worker. Because the worker of tomorrow is one that's got to be much more savvy than the worker of yesterday. So I just say that we're looking at a flywheel, and every cog has got to be developed, or else there's a skip. And the more perfect we can develop that flywheel that has all the parts of developing a child. And I would argue that, you can't just stop at 4 or 5 years old. It's something that has to carry forward all the way through until the person enters the workforce. And I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I'm just I'm wound up about it.
Well, we're glad you're wound up in our direction. One of the things that you've heard today is this funding challenge for child care providers. The reality of how much you can charge a parent for their living conditions, and then also how you fund the salary and all of the expenses associated with the child care center. Many of us have talked at length about how challenging that is, and some of us, and I'm guilty of this, have even talked about the broken model that exists right now. So to that end, we rely heavily on our philanthropic partners and the generosity of their work to try to do some innovative things. And certainly Mr. Davenport and his wife have been leading that across the state. Ms. Ben, if you would talk about the $1 million, very generous investment that you and your wife made several years ago into community colleges for the training of early childhood professionals, how you believe that is helping to maximize workforce development, and why you all continue to fund this with some really innovative things happening at these community colleges.
Well, I don't think you don't get good outcomes without good input. Most of the people, as has been alluded to here today, are minimum wage workers in child care. I don't like that, but I mean, that's just a fact of life. They can't afford to pay for advanced education, but yet they need the tools to be able to interact properly with children. And they're hungry for knowledge. The people that are people that are, they're like missionaries, I think, that work in child care. They have a passion. They're not there for the money, but they're there for what they're doing for mankind. And so we need to nurture that. So Betty and I chose several years ago to fund a program in 4 community colleges, and Patrick and Henry was one of them.
And the best one, I would add.
Probably so. I'm remembering where I am. But anyway, the deal was that we were going to have an intense program that was going to give skills to people that wanted to go to school. It wouldn't cost them anything, and we would help train them in the most advanced skills of early childhood interaction. So it's been a thrill for us. We continue to fund programs for Patrick and Henry, and through our foundation, and Greg, with his background in early childhood, he has a passion. So I mean, we're well suited for each other.
Here, here. I will add one of the things that the Davenports are funding right now, and we've got our folks here from Patrick and Henry, Dr. Harrison, Dr. Hodge, who are part of this work, is standing up internships now, standing up work-based learning, figuring out how you get an apprenticeship program launched so that we can get folks who are in the pipeline getting their education, but getting them into the classroom. We do lots of student teaching, we do lots of field place experiences, and there is an expectation for 50 years that all of that has been done for free. But I think you all understand that our students can't do free. And so getting them some paid experience while they're in there and getting them the credential has been transformative for us. So I'm going to ask everyone a final question, and since you've got the microphone, we'll start there and just work our way down. And this is a lengthy one. As leaders in small business, large scale, economic development, and nonprofit, each of you have demonstrated this really powerful connection between child care, between workforce development, and economic growth. So let's go ahead 10, 15 years. How can businesses of all sizes, regardless if it's a small business of a handful of employees or hundreds of employees, or a regional nonprofit, how can we collaborate more effectively to expand access, number one, and then number two, what collective action do we as a region need to undertake to ensure that childcare becomes a cornerstone? That's two long questions. Let me say them again quickly. How can we regionally collaborate better, more effectively to expand access? And then what collective action do we need to take to ensure that childcare is a regional cornerstone? And we'll start with you, Mr. Davenport.
One thing I think is out there, I'm trying to think about the low-hanging fruit. So we have churches that have great facilities. And I think that it's something that our churches need to get heavily involved in. Our church, the one that I go to, is a daycare center in it now, and so now there are like 60 children that are involved there. So, well, we need to do that everywhere. And you know, one of the biggest things that has to be overcome, Mr. Scales, I think would agree, is the facility. I mean, so you have people that are providers, but they can't afford to build a facility or to rent a facility. And so I think in addition to what Longwood offers, I know the National Chamber of Commerce also has a playbook to help you understand how to start a daycare center. But we've got to get really aggressive in this, and and we have to look at our own backyard and say, well, what can we do to get involved? I really think this thing of pushing the funding of helping parents. We're getting ready to see a big dip beginning in 25 in the number of students that are going to be college age, and as a result of that, we're going to see a lot of colleges go out of business because they're just not going to have the enrollment.
Can I pause there a second? No. In the last year, triple-digit numbers of colleges have closed in the last year across America because of what he's referring to that we call the enrollment cliff. Pardon me.
So I'd say directly connected to that is that parents are saying we can't afford to raise children. Well, I think if we could make it affordable to raise children, that we would see a change. But if we don't, I mean, people dedicating to spend 30 or 40% of their income, it's just a real block. So I think there's just some things that we've got to recognize and deal with.
Well said. Marianne?
Yeah, clearly I'm a big Jenna Conway fan, but one of the things that she has encouraged our organization throughout the years is rural does not mean less.
Say it again.
Rural does not mean less. So, that's a Jenna Conway quote. We use it all of the time. So when you're thinking about collaboration, don't think just because we're from small communities that seem to not have resources, that you don't have the right partners at the table. Everybody can be at the table in some aspect. So I would charge each of you as you're going back and thinking about maybe you're an HR person, maybe you're a child care center owner, maybe you're a policymaker or community leader. Reach out to an unlikely partner. Think about something that maybe y'all have had a partnership before, it crashed and burned, and you've never worked together again. But it was 9 or 10 years ago, and the people aren't there. Reach out to an unlikely partner in the next couple of weeks and say, hey, how can we work on this child care issue together? This is how it's affecting me. How is it affecting you? And really start building those bridges. And then I wanted to mention something that Mr. Davenport mentioned. So think about what you all can also do in your community to bring resources to bear around that facility perspective. So for the economic development perspective, it's always about site-ready builds, site-ready sites, buildings, all of that. Think about that from a child care perspective as well. One of the things that our organization has done in our unlikely partnerships is in December 2021, we laid out a public vision to create 100 new child care slots for a specific locality where a lot of our workforce is in Southwest Virginia. A couple months later, the hospital system called and they said, hey, y'all are doing 100 slots. Can we give 100 slots and make it 200 slots? Then the Food City is a Virginia-based company that we are lucky enough to have at headquarters in Abingdon, Virginia, and they walk the walk in every sense of the word. Food City said, hey, we're gonna go in on this too. Let's create a center for 300 children in our region. So today, along with partnerships, my organization does not operate child care centers. We never will, we don't want to, but we do want to facilitate that ability. So what we were able to do is run a capital campaign that we created a brand new facility. So again, it has all the bells and whistles. It's beautiful, it's state of the art, but we knew that what mattered most is what happens in those classrooms. So through a contracting process, of which the operator of the center was very willing, we ensured that they take all types of subsidy, that they work with families from all levels of income. And one of the beautiful, unlikely partnerships that has come from that is within that child care center, we have a Virginia Preschool Initiative classroom, and we have another collaborative classroom that the teacher is Washington County Public Schools, because that's where the site is, and that teacher is VPI. We have kids in that classroom who are Head Start kids, mixed delivery funded kids, private pay kids, and Department of Social Service subsidy kids. So when we think about parent choice and think about how we're gonna meet those family needs, if Head Start funding for some reason drops off at 3 o'clock for that child, mixed delivery can come in and wrap that until 5 or 6 p.m., keeping those parents at work. So back to what I originally said, reach out to unlikely partners. Don't be afraid to dream up crazy solutions and see how you can build pathways to get them there.
Thank you, Marianne. Kate?
Yeah, I think that the idea of rural childcare is something that probably is not on the books and not on a lot of people's minds. You know, in maybe in the state government and in the federal government, and I think, you know, for my county, we're exceptionally rural community, 450 people in the town and 15,000 people in the county, and it's a pretty big county too. So what that means is that facilities are a huge problem, and one of the pathways that I see to that is to lean on legislators to think a little bit differently about the way that we regulate childcare and allowing for some cooperative groups of home childcare providers that could be licensed together. And I think this speaks a little bit to the idea of the churches that have the facilities, like meet the facilities where they are, make sure that the children are well taken care of and protected, but work with communities where they are and try and help build those programs and in frankly a little less restrictive way. You know, and in terms of a small business like mine, I mean, we have 47 employees, and 6 of those are childcare providers. And so I sort of speak collectively to all the businesses in the building there. We have a cafe, we have the coffee roasting business, and we have the childcare. And so I think that you know, there really is the potential there for a small business to think creatively, whether or not you put a facility in your building, to just think about meeting your employees where they are. Maybe you only have one employee who has a child, but more than likely you have several. And what are the things that could be done for them? Is it a subsidy from the business that goes to a more collective operation? Because I think that the whole process, I want to go back to something that Mr. Davenport said, is that it is cyclical, and the idea that people are having less children because it's too expensive to have children actually goes back to the fact that there isn't childcare which means that people can't go to work, which means that directly affects inflation and makes it more expensive to have childcare. So somewhere we have to like stick our hand in and stop the fan and start making a solution, or else it's just going to perpetually keep on rolling.
Excellent, excellent. We have a few minutes left, and so I want to open it up to the floor for questions. And I realize that we had to cut the last session short, so if there was a burning question that you did not get to ask, we still have some of our panelists here at this table. You are welcome to ask them a question as well. So questions you'd like to ask from this panel, or our folks here from our previous panel as well. All right. Yeah, Tammy?
I always feel like I'm the one to ask a question. Thank you. So this is not in my city council role. This is more as a small business owner.
Sure.
It was mentioned earlier about restaurants and a lot of those in the service industry. They don't have, regular 8 to 5 hours, weekends, late nights, etc. Have you ever seen anything like maybe a small business consortium or group getting together and providing some type of childcare? So instead of just one small business like yours, especially in this area with those types of hours, I was thinking it may be helpful if we could get a group together and not only share the cost, but also in regards to the various hours we have to.
And so, Tammy, I think you were reading my notes here. My last comment was going to be on what we didn't talk about. And one of the things that we didn't talk about is the fact that most child care centers close at 6 o'clock, but all jobs don't end at 6 o'clock. What do we do with sick children when parents have to? I don't mean the child. I mean they get sent home from school when the parent has to take off work if they're able. What do we do with special needs children for whom the ratios are even more intense? So if you want to speak to that or any of these, Mary Ann.
Yeah, sure. So I would encourage you all there's a model in Northern Virginia of licensed family day homes that work together as a network. And so it really speaks to some of what you're thinking about. Hayden said something earlier that it would be a beautiful thing. Tennessee's figured this out, Virginia hasn't quite gotten there yet, that we could have a licensed provider. So think about I don't know your region super well. A director is here in Martinsville and running a family day home. And he or she also has a family day home in Floyd under that same licensure. Current licensure prevents that from happening in Virginia, so that's an opportunity to think about how you're working with your local legislators to navigate that. Also, there are shared services alliances. My organization stood up one for child care providers 2 summers ago, so we're just now finishing out our 2nd year. We provide everything from enrollment management software, payroll processing, HR on call, all kinds of professional development. We run an entrepreneurship challenge that's really, think about like your local chamber of commerce likely has one of these for entrepreneurs. We do that specifically for childcare. So what happens during that is there's a cohort of people that are starting a business together, and those organically built networks begin to happen. So I know that was a lot of different things to your question, but yes, you must work together to make it work. And in rural areas, those licensed family day homes are a vital piece of that child care system for your region. So I've been talking about a center that we have where a whole lot of the workforce lives and works in Southwest Virginia. But in order for us to all work together, it's about the system. And we need those smaller scale providers as well, and to figure out how do we incentivize them? How do we get that home ready for licensure? We've had grants that have been successful before. We've done everything from like vaccinate people's dogs and buy loads of gravel for their driveway just to get them to the point of licensure so that they can become a licensed family day home. So you can think about it on a larger scale, but really approach it from that network approach.
Beautiful. Excellent. We have time for one more question if anyone has one more. Ms. Cobb.
My burning question is about the educators and the staff that we're recruiting for these positions. We've heard a lot from everybody. As a former elementary teacher and stay embedded, I have a lot of educators in my family in early childhood education, all the way through community college and then also law professors. And I hear a lot about burnout. I spend a lot of time with early childhood educators, the burnout of them, and what is the motivation, incentive for the people, what we refer to in the buildings, that are in the trenches doing work.
Well, I mean, from where we sit as a private business, we're lucky because we can pay competitively, but because we don't rely on the income of the child care facility. But still, burnout is a real issue. I think that, you know, this is probably one of the hardest jobs that you can imagine, right? And one of the things that we struggle with in our business is making sure that the people who utilize the facility, the parents who work for the coffee businesses, treat the providers with the respect and the care that they deserve, and that you know, we work really hard to build a culture of respect, because, you know, as one, I was just speaking to one of our providers who's a former director of a child care facility who now works for us part-time. She's in her 60s, and she just said, it's systemic. That's the way it's been my entire career. And you know, she worked in Iowa for many years and ran a child care facility there. And for us, we don't want to accept that, because I think that that alone can lead to a sense of hopelessness, that you're so passionate about what you do that you work for a lot less money than you could make somewhere else. And the people who are your secondary customers, which is the parents, or the people that you are ultimately doing the job for, don't provide you with the respect and treat you as a professional. So I think from the core, that's something, that's a paradigm that needs to shift, to not think about child care providers as babysitters. But we're entrusting them with our most important asset, right? And we know the data is there that says that under 3, under 5, schooling, work in small classroom levels, you know, provides us a huge stepping stone academically and socially and emotionally for these children as they grow up and go to school and become adults. And we're asking someone else to do that for our child. And so I'm not sure if I'm necessarily getting to the crux of what you're asking, but I think it's probably in every industry, people think that their product is undervalued. I certainly think that about my coffee. But I would say nowhere do I see it more poignantly than in a child care facility.
We have 1 minute. LaShawna, would you speak to that really quickly about this issue of burnout and how you are mitigating that? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but how you are, thank you, mitigating that as a provider, because I think that is so essential to this conversation. How are you as a provider helping to minimize burnout and turnover as a provider in our community?
Well, we just recently had a staff meeting, just like a week or 2 ago, and I had advised staff, if you feel like you need a moment, you know, if a child is getting too unruly or uncontrollable, you need time. You know, I just recently had hired, excuse me, an administrator. So I have extra staff there now. Hey, come to us. You can step into my office, have a chill moment. We'll take over your class. If you need to take an extra lunch, what have you, you know, I have no problem with stepping in, coming back, doing what needs to be done, just to make sure that their peace of mind is okay, and that they can come back and after they have a collective thought and get themselves together to come back and be able to provide for the children. Of course, we have other incentives in place, things of that nature, taking extra days off, things of that nature. So this is still a work in progress. It's a work in progress.
Sure, thank you. I'll close by this simple statement. When I had the great privilege of teaching elementary school for 12 years. 9 of those were spent in 3rd grade. I loved every single second of being an elementary school teacher. And I used to tell my 3rd grade parents all the time, the 3rd grade is the year where we transition from learning to read to reading to learn. And I thought I was so creative, but I found out today that everybody knew that already. So join me in thanking these panelists today. Thank you.